Hope I'm audible.
Yes, doctor.
Yeah. So, good evening, everyone. Thanks for the introduction. For a moment, I thought I'm back to my teaching and learning period, teaching and learning period as an undergraduate trainee, and was reminded of some of these lectures where we always used to anxiously look forward to some of the illuminaries of the field teaching us and giving us insights into where we are headed. So thanks so much, IIP, for inviting me for this discussion. I would call it a discussion rather than a lecture. This obviously, I do not intend it to make it a scientific lecture on aging or living with the aged. I was informed that the audience is mixed, involves general public, some students, and specialists who know much more than me over here, and senior people as well who have the lived experience of aging. So I wouldn't dare to theorize too much, but just generally introduce the topic and also spend some time on my thoughts on what we are faced with. I think that is more important at the end of the session to have a clear idea on some of the larger societal issues which we are facing with, but at the same time, we are not even completely be aware of. So just wondering, initially when I was asked to deliberate on a topic, the title was quite interesting on aging and living with the aged. I can say I have the lived experience of both. I live with a very senior person who's very active, so still active in a professional field. And also, I was reminded of my own aging when, over the last, let's say, 3, 4 years, people who come across, young fellows who came across, started addressing me as uncle. Well, that's the first sign, okay? You're aging, probably you're not as young as you would think. So these are two aspects which I thought was quite interesting. That's why the title kind of uh, embodies my own experience, lived experience of my own aging and experiencing life with aged people. To give a brief idea about the other background that I have, I run a geriatric care clinic at Ramchandra with Professor Satyanathan, who's my teacher and mentor. We take care of elderly in distress, especially with memory disorders and other related problems, as well as whole gamut of problems which we see in this population. So that's another reason why I thought this would be interesting to discuss further some of the experiences that we have gained. And I'm really looking forward to interacting with the larger public and looking forward to some of the questions. I hope I would rather learn more from you than probably give a scientific reply to some of the questions. It is more a mutual learning process that I intend to achieve. Without much other, without much details, any other aspects on this. So let me just focus on the discussion as such. So I intend to spend initial few minutes, 15 minutes on the concept of aging as such. What exactly is that? And on the second half, I intend to focus on the second part of the topic, some of the issues that we tend to see as professionals. Uh, I know Tad is a very good friend of mine who I refer some of these problems. I feel myself when I feel incompetent to handle some of these things. Tad has really helped me with some of the family issues, especially with elderly. He has the expertise in handling them. So this is something which came to my mind as to when we start talking about aging. Very important thing to think about is why so much people are concerned about the idea of aging. It's some unique feature of we as human beings, as species. Why do we have such concern about getting older? Now, ageism is something which everyone might be familiar with. We discriminate people based on their age. That's got a serious implication in various areas of work and societal structure. But let's, if you look back at some of the issues which cropped up, which has cropped up in our society, we might think that aging and related issues are quite new. But aging as such is a concept which was there quite thought of and evaluated, philosophized, discussed from quite early. Now, the earliest example I can think of is nothing other than what is there from the Mahabharata. The Mahabharata has this famous Yaksha Prashna, where Yaksha, who is none other than the god of death, confronts Yudhishthira with a series of questions. He has to answer them for that, so that his brothers could live. Otherwise, he too may fall down dead. One of the questions that he asked, if many of you might know this, he asked Yudhishthira the question, what is the most astonishing fact in this world with human beings? Yudhishthira had no second thoughts on this. He just immediately replied, when we see people aging, people getting unwell, and people get dying everywhere around us, and we see people seeing this in front of them all the time, this miraculous aspect of life is also evident, that they continue to move forward without even giving a thought about this. What is more awe-inspiring as well as most miraculous than this? Now, that's a fantastic way of looking at the aging concept. There's something in us which makes us forget that there's this happening in each and every one of us. And also, it's important to understand that this changes as the life stages change. Now, there could be a young boy of around 10 who wants to become big, become an adult. There's a young adult who wants to become a capable entrepreneur. There's a young married man who would want to become a father. And there's this father somewhere along wants to see his kids grow up well. And then there's this father who wants to see his grandparents. There's always it's associated with some stage of life. So people yearn for something else. And there comes a particular point in your life where you start thinking, I wish I were young again. I wish I was a child. I wish I was a young man who was more carefree. Again, it's very interesting to see how that develops over a period of time. Now, in Tirukural, I wouldn't dare to quote the stanza as such, but this is stanza. I know there are Tamil scholars in the audience. I wouldn't dare to do that, but there's a stanza which says one of the important roles or duties of young people is to associate with the wise and the learned elderly. So it's again shows a society from very young, very early days understood the significance of aging as such, the importance of aged people in the society, the value that they gave to society, and also the process of aging that happened. Now there are debates around as to what happens when people age and why aging as such happens. Now, from a scientific point of view, there are multiple explanations for this. I wouldn't want to bore you with all the details of it. I'd certainly highlight some of them, but quite interesting for you to think about. Now, what is it that we are worried about aging? I feel one of the most important reasons why people are worried about aging is people invariably connect aging with that of death and disability, and also the impermanence of one's own existence. That's an interesting way to look at it, where it may not be connected. As you can see, aging at different stages have different roles, different goals. But beyond a particular point of time, when people are faced with their own mortality, which otherwise you will not think about, as Yudhishthira has very poignantly pointed out at that time in the Mahabharata ages with the Yaksha, we don't seem to think about our own impermanence in this world. Is that all? Is it because we associate aging with death that we become more concerned and worried? What exactly happens as we age. That's an important thing to think about again. So broadly, science has tried to understand a particular pattern in which aging happens. They have looked at aging from different angles. Is it something that to do with genes? We all know about genes as some of the building blocks, DNA, and the genetic material, which gives a blueprint of life. So, is that the same thing which gives a blueprint of aging and death? Now, they looked at again the problems with genetic information transfer. As we grow older, there seems to be some problem in which how information is transferred from one cell to the other. Now, we all know about Chinese whispers. We all used to do play that in school. From one end of the class, somebody whispers something to the other person, and then at the end of the other, other side of the class, it completely changes. Now, the same feature happens in the body also. As cells multiply, divide, and regenerate, some of the information is made wrong. And these accumulates over a period of time and leads to changes in your brain, changes in your heart structure, changes overall in your muscular system, and then you become age. That's one simple, one way of looking at aging. Now there could be changes in your DNA, which is there in your nucleus or the cell. There could be changes in your another important organelle called mitochondria. That seems to accumulate changes. Mitochondria is energy powerhouse of the cell. We do see that as we study muscle tissues and mitochondria cells of people at different age levels. We've had a lot more mutations or changes in the genetic material, the DNA structure, as a person grows older. So 85-year-old man's mitochondrial DNA can be quite different from that of, let's say, a 20-year-old person. There is also the impact of external environment. We know that our brain and even the genetic aspects is a genetic material in our body are completely dynamic, unlike what we thought, say, 20 years earlier. We know about epigenetic mechanisms whereby external stressors, environment changes do have a role in changing these materials. So, is that what is accumulated over a period of time and leading on to changes? That's something which, again, science have looked at, but they're not conclusively found answers to it. One of the most interesting theory is that a particular uh, understanding of a particular enzyme called telomerase. Now, telomeres are the end parts of chromosomes. Now, telomere is one enzyme which preserves telomeres. What we know as the person gets older is small bits of this chromosomes get broken off. And then presence of this enzyme kind of ensures the length of the DNA, the chromosome, subsequently leading to longevity. So what we've seen is uh, people who live for longer periods tend to have much more preserved chromosomes in their body, and this tends to prolong their life and also the survival of the cells, in turn leading on to longer life. A lot of research is happening in this area to look at how we can artificially ensure these telomeres are preserved. Now, the danger with that is self-preserving mode is also there in cancer cells. Now, they continue to reproduce, they never die off, which is why it becomes cancerous. Now, treatment for that might also open up a Pandora's box. So that's where science is to see at one aspect of how research is able to understand what happens with aging and how to prevent aging. If you consider this as a disease model, that's one simplistic, like say, biomedical model of aging. On the other side, there is other theories which also look at aging in a way whereby we understand this as a problem with a general rate of living. We tend to have a more dynamic basal metabolic rate so that you tend to spend off energy. So we have people with a lower basal metabolic rate tend to have a more prolonged life. The other thing what people have looked at is we accumulate waste products of our metabolism in the body, and that tend to carry on for longer periods. That seem to cause aging. Now, all these, including the other thing which everybody in the community will be aware of is everybody talks about nowadays about detox. I've gone for a detox therapy. There are patients who come and tell me, Doc, I had a detox for my mind. I would ask him then, why are you here then with me? But then, I mean, everything is considered as people think we are all filled with toxins and that are mechanisms by which we could detoxify ourselves. It can be at subtler levels. Aura cleansing is conceptually discussed and thought of. So one way of understanding aging there is, are we accumulating waste materials and free radicals over a period of time, which leads to aging? The other interesting aspect to think of aging is also to look at this as an energy crisis at the cellular level, and energy crisis at the social societal level. We have fixed energy to use. So what is usually seen in the body is there are certain cells in the body which need to be definitely be preserved to sustain the species to the next generation. Obviously, you're talking about the eggs and the sperms, the germ cells in the body. Now that's important. So much of the energy is preserved or reserved or used to preservation of these cells at the cost of focus on other body cells. So the other body cells get less energy, and then gradually they accumulate all this toxins and not able to repair themselves, and slowly the aging process starts. Now, the other aspect of understanding this is at the societal level, we have a fixed energy level. We know energy can neither be created nor destroyed. So we have enough, fixed amount of energy which can be utilized. It has to transform to some other. So it's a transfer which is happening from one source to the other. There's a continuum which is there, and aging is just part of that continuum. Very interesting to think about some of these from a larger perspective. Having said that, if somebody comes and asks me, Doctor, is there something that you can tell me or give me as a suggestion to make me not age? So I'll ask them, is it something that you are asking for? Is it something, or are you actually asking for not dying? Okay. No, 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 no. I know I will die, but I don't want to age so quickly. Most of these Rakshasas in Puranas, most of the stories, all of them are tried. They have even tried to please the most benevolent of gods and ask for this one question: let me not die. Somehow they've all been disappointed. So death as such is a reality. But if you want to prevent aging, that's all that you are interested in. Only one scientifically proven method is dietary restriction or calorie restriction. So one single tip, if I can give to aspiring anti-aging groups, that is what brought you to this lecture. I would say cut down your calorie intake to 60%, but nutritionally adequate, but cut down your calorie to 60%. There's a much higher chance of you surviving longer, much higher chance of you having less metabolic problems, much lesser chance of you having uh, old age related disabilities, much lesser chance of you getting, I would say, morbid obesity, and obviously the other issues related to uh, nutritional excess. And there's a much lesser chance of some of the cardiovascular and neurological illnesses. So there's a clear evidence from mammalian studies. There have been some studies in human beings. There is n number of examples in our population. Some of the monks and other people who have a very disciplined, calorie-restricted diet tend to live longer. Any other suggestion, consider it as hoax. There's no other clear evidence of any of those methods to prevent aging. All right. Now, moving on to the aging, to what exactly we understand from now on, from now, what I'll do is probably take the discussion away from topic away from simplified aging of the body to what constitutes a healthy living and healthy aging. It's a very important thing to understand these two. Just extending the life may not be sufficient for most of these purposes. People tend to live longer, but with increasing disability. Now, that's not going to help anyone. So there are more and more concepts where you talk about disability adjusted life years, which is called DALI, or disability adjusted life expectancy. That's more important. So rather than how long you live, how effectively you live and how well you live without disability assumes more importance. So when somebody says you do this because so that you live longer, well, you may not want to sometimes have such a long life. You may want to have a probably a healthier life. Now, nothing captures it better than this famous slogan, which I think recently had circulated in the WhatsApp. Shankaracharya Periyar had spoken about this. Anayasena maranam vina dhainyena jeevitam. So where the death is without any difficulty, where the life is without discomfort or without any disability. Now, this is again rooted in our culture, where we spoke more about the quality of life rather than just the extension of life. I give you an example. It might be a tough one to think about. Aruna Schonbach, the nurse who was brutally raped, and then she was in a vegetative state. She lived for 70 years. But what was the status? That brought about a whole lot of discussion recently in the society about advance directive and passive euthanasia, the concept of even euthanasia itself in our country. Very interesting to, when you think about some of these things where a terrible tragedy had to make our eyes open and help us understand. Now, again, I go back to Yudhishthira, who wondered why people are running around when everywhere around they see aging and death happening, but they just think that it doesn't happen to me. Right. So then, if you look at again, we move to the from disability to some of the population studies on aging. There have been studies which have been done done to look at what exactly keeps people healthy and well. One of the oldest women ever to have lived is Jeanne Calment in France. She was 122 years when she died. What they looked at is they looked at around 55 of her relatives and found that around one-fourth of them lived more for around 84 and above in their age. So, which essentially tells you that there is certainly genetics which plays a part, and you cannot have much control about it. On the other side, environment and lifestyle. There's a whole population in Japan. I'm sure many of you would have seen again documentaries or articles about the Okinawa uh, island in near Japan, part of Japan, where most of the people live up to 90 and 100. Now, what they looked at very interestingly, they found they have what is called the rainbow diet. You have 7 colors on your plate for different kinds of food stuff, from mainly vegetarian diet, and fish was a major ingredient. Very interesting to look at those aspects. Again, tells us there's certainly an interaction between a gene and the environment and your lifestyle, which contributes to healthy aging. All right, so let's look at the larger aspect of aging and the problems related to aging. Rather than the problem, I would call these are challenges of you aging. I mean, this is applicable to everyone. Everyone ages, so it's applicable to everyone. It's not that I'm now 20, I don't have to think about it, but you will reach there. It's good to understand so that you are at least empathic towards the aged over here, which is what we as clinicians see more and more. The empathy seems to be lacking in people when it comes to caring for the aged. So that brings to the larger a question of living with the age, but let's understand the some sociological aspects of normal aging. There's this concept of successful aging, where we think about a person continues to be productive as much as possible to as long as they live, versus the earlier concept of disengagement from disengagement theory, where they thought that okay, elderly could withdraw from life and work and relationships, and this is considered to be a normal phenomena. We don't consider ascribe to that view anymore. But more importantly, what we have taken up is what is called a life course perspective. We have various stages where throughout life one is faced with continuities, and some discontinuities. There are stages, events, sometimes we are faced with which we need to negotiate and successfully move forward and resolve. Most of the time, the problems comes when we are not able to, or when we are overwhelmed with these stages. Now, it's also interesting. Some of the anthropological studies and the sociological studies have looked at age as a signpost. We tend to look back when you talk about an age. It's a intangible concept. Like we call ourselves aged, but actually it is nothing, because we do have a lifespan. That's the only reason why we have age as a chronological number. We tend to see at any part of our life, we tend to see our time before, and we tend to see our life ahead. There's always this dynamic interaction between what has been and what is going to be. And age is one concept which kinds of interlinks that and gives us meaning. Nothing is more illuminating than some of the work of developmental psychologists like Erikson, for example. If you look at Erikson's psychosocial stages of life, very beautifully captured some of these things. Sorry. He talked about from the age 18 to 40, we have intimacy versus isolation as concepts, where talked about the role of the person, there in that age group, is to identify and nurture long-lasting relationships, and they tend to find love. From then on, from the next stage onwards, we categorize into a stage called generativity versus stagnation. Generativity is nothing but being productive in one's life. If you notice, some of the people at age 40, that's the time when they start becoming a little restless. They try to do more. We have this midlife crisis we talk about. And what exactly happens is there is an inherent urge in us to do something which is beyond us. And many people work on that. Well, Tad, I don't know how old are you, but maybe IIP has come at the age of 40. Probably. It's very interesting to think in that way. We'll debate it after when we meet. But anyway, well, it's very interesting to again to think of what we do as we reach towards that age. I guess most of you listeners are in that age group. Then he talked about the next stage, at the last stage of life, where we have ego integrity versus despair. Now, that's a stage of life most of the elderly, 65 to and above, live in. What essentially happens there is they think about themselves, their life, and then ask this question: Was this life? Was this a life that I wanted to live? Is it worth? Was it worth living? Now, many a times, what we see in our clinic, if you understand the presentations of elderly with these problems, is people struggle to come to terms with this aspect. Now, it could be because of life changes, widowhood. That's why the life stage concept, what I was talking about. Any changes in life at that time, it's more difficult for people to adapt to that, and also has a big bearing on how they understand how they live their life. And then there's a higher risk of clinical depression and other related issues. Now, I wouldn't get into the medical aspect of it, which is not what the goal of this lecture is, or the discussion is. Now, very interesting, again, if you look at this, how we correlate or understand this in relation to what concepts we have in our own country. We have the concept of 4 ashramas in Indian culture. Again, this fits in very well with aging and living with ages, but it also gives a guidance on how we need to live our life. Brahmacharya is more the selfish part of life. You live for yourself, you acquire knowledge, not in a negative connotation by any chance. It's more about you develop, it's a self-development stage. Whereas then comes the Garhastyam. It's not about finding a wife and having children, but it's also about dissolving your sense of self to a larger group beyond you. And then comes the next stage where you have the Vanaprastha. Vanaprastha doesn't necessarily mean, people confuse this sometimes, with how they understood. They confuse this with moving out of the society. Not exactly. It's again broadening your vision to a role beyond that of yourself and the family to that of a community. That's a good way of understanding this. Now, this fits in well with the generativity stage of life. You start looking for something, a legacy which is beyond yourself. Then comes the last part of sannyasa. Again, people have misconception about sannyasa. Sannyasa is not again leaving everything and running off. It's about being detached and also understanding the larger perspective of one's life, being in touch with your spiritual aspect. Now, spiritual is a strong word for many, but WHO clearly has defined that as part of one of the reasons to, one of the major criteria to have the definition defining points of health. So this fits in with some of the, you find a lot of similarities between theories and practice across cultures and even the scientific theories with what we've traditionally practiced in our country. So that brings to the last part. I think I have maybe 5 more minutes, 10 more minutes.
Yeah, you have probably 5 more minutes.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, then we.
So that's the last part of the talk which I want to look into. Now, invariably, what we have seen in the last few decades is this big transition from a society. One of the introductory speakers in the beginning, Divakar, I think, spoke about this large transition of our society from that of a joint, cohesive social system to that of a nuclear family and individualistic society. But I think we have still not imbibed the significance of this as to what it means to us who are in that aging bracket. We have not become the elderly, but okay, not the youngest or the young also, but the larger group. I'm talking about people like myself. There is a huge demand on a society which is going to come up in the next few years. Now, there are 3 reasons which I can tell you as a primary cause for this. One is an increased longevity of life, which means that we used to celebrate Shashti Purti, or what you call the 60th birthday, very grandly earlier. Now, one of the reasons why we have, I don't know whether you have thought about as to why this is so significant. One of the things I can think about is none of the people actually lived up to 60 at that time. The life expectancy at the time of independence in India was 49 years. So you can see why 60 years was significant. Now, the life expectancy as of now is around 72, which means there's a significant number on the other side of the curve, which uh, people live up to 80s and 90s. But have you thought about the children of these people who are 90s and 80s? Now, what we're seeing in our experience working with the geriatric population, people coming with elderly, is there is a huge group of elderly who are either alone because of this migration, the factors, sociological factors which you have identified. There is more independent living, there is cohesive existence, but nearby there are multiple settings which we have. At the same time, when they get age, there's a increasing demand on their own children. And what is the age of their children? They are in their 60s and 70s who are providing care to the people who are in their 80s and 90s. Now, this is a big challenge. So many people rue the fact that old age homes are coming up. There is an increasing denial of care. On the other side, one has to be realistic with what is possible to provide care for the elderly who is disabled by somebody who themselves are disabled, who are in the 60s and 70s, if they have not lived a healthy life or they have not aged functionally. Now that is a challenge which we are seeing in our population. So I have had, this is from the real experience with, with my clinical experience. There's a lady who was in her 60s, was a retired teacher, who came and actually told me she's providing care for her 92-year-old mother. She said she comes alone because she was treated for depression elsewhere, and then we got into chatting as to what the status is, how she manages to provide care. They both are living in a house. She One of the sessions she suddenly opened up, and then we got into chatting. How does she cope up with this care? And she talks about her children, one son being in another city, another daughter somewhere overseas. She said, "I just love to be with my grandchildren, but I can't be away. And I feel terribly, terribly angry at my mother. But I don't want to acknowledge that. But I want to provide care. At the same time, I don't know why I am missing out on my life and my own joy. I do find joy in caring for my mother. But what about my own joy?" Now, this kind of opened up my eyes as to some of the issues, and then we could actually see the conflict that people are faced with nowadays. Now, this leads to a larger question of what elderly require when you're providing care for them. Now, we didn't hear, and I didn't get to hear the perspective of the person she was providing care about. She was an excellent carer, but we usually find elderly require two, three things which are very important. One is, as much as possible, independence. If we can ensure as much independence as possible, whether it's functionally, financially, with a right balance of privacy and provision of care, many a times problems arise where people do not know what's that right balance, and that's where the problems come up. Second important thing, what I feel, which many a time is not looked into, is the aspect of personal freedom. Many a time, many elderly, I'm talking about the oldest of the old even, worried about that loss of personal freedom and being a burden. How we address that concern forms a major challenge in providing the right amount of care. And the third important thing is this sense of self-sufficiency. Now, I can again tell from my personal experience. My grandmother, at the age of 95, we go over there, she would be sitting there and completing the Hindu crossword in 30 minutes. And there's my aunt who's a professional who continues to see patients and continues to provide guidance and gives the leadership in mental health care. Now, these are remarkable people, but exceptions. Most of the time, self-sufficiency also means, but I also notice both of them are fiercely common traits, if you ask me, fiercely independent to an extent that even if we ask when they ask me to get something, they're very particular that they give the money. I said, why can't I buy something for you? No, you can buy me if you want. This now I asked you, I would like to pay you. You know that sense of, not that they had. I wouldn't say my grandmother was the richest person after Queen Elizabeth, but she was happy with the pension that she received. She was contained. She had much minimal needs. She was taken care of well by all her children, but she was also very particular, including her treatment. She was very particular that she paid for themselves. Now, if we can at least ensure, I mean, it's not financial independence alone. Self-sufficiency has got a larger meaning and context, which ensures self-confidence. It increases the mental health of the elderly, as well as it gives them a greater sense of purpose of life. I think that is something which, at least for people who live with the aged or provide care for the aged, or people who try to instill that sense of well-being in the aged, should aim for, where a right balance of personal freedom, self-sufficiency, and ensuring that they do not feel themselves as a burden to themselves and burden to others, which is the most dreaded feeling one can have at that stage of life. So I think I would conclude by sort of highlighting I started with concept of aging and why we never think about our own aging, the reality, how we understand aging necessarily, essentially with death, and it makes us frightened about aging. And then aging as a sociological construct where industrialization and strict regimental roles made us I can form an idea that this is what aging is about. There are societies where there's no such structured roles, so they continue to live without a worry about aging. For example, in African societies and some of the traditional Aboriginal population in our country itself, we had that experience in Wayanad where I worked during my MBBS time. So to conclude, there is always this psychological inner time which we carry, and there's a physical and a sociological outer aging that we are faced with. How we find that right balance is how we will age gracefully and successfully, uh, not become a burden to ourselves and others. And that's a challenge that one has to take up, not only to gracefully age, as well as to provide support to the aged. Thanks so much. I think I would stop with that. I'm happy to have a discussion and listen to your viewpoints on this. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Dr. Jay Kumar. I mean, wonderful, interact. You made it so easy that from your experience and from science to Puranas to that you have covered a lot more related with aging and living with the aged. So now the floor is open for questions. People have already given their questions already in the chat box. So I will collate that and put it across for your responses. Yeah. So the first question is that one Mr. Sabapati Narayanan, who is also part of Wellbe work. So he has asked a question that there's a biggest concern that age to population is they are not being considered important even at their own homes. So this causes stress. So how do you handle such issues?
Right. Now, Mr. Narayan, I don't know your age. Is that I would like to know what perspective it is coming from. Not that you have observed it yourself as an age person in your friends or colleagues, or it's an important theme. As I said, it's an important area which needs to be discussed in a larger forums and gatherings as to how we ensure with this prolongation of life and longer life expectancy, how do we communicate to the elderly they're still valued? Now, there are theories, there are various studies which have looked at even culture, for example, is considered to be this constant dynamic interaction between the aged, the elderly, the wisdom that they carry with the newer emerging understanding of life, sciences, the information which comes through with the newer generation. And then what these new generation imbibe, which are valuable and valuable to them. Some of the ideas, maybe theories, and some of the concepts or even practices may be redundant in a modern age, the current age. But it might be there are a whole lot of value systems which are universal and which needs to be carried forward for the larger sustenance of the society. Now, no other person can give this than a person who has experienced and gained that wisdom. Having said that, it also is equally important to communicate and also for tell ourselves as we age, it's important to age in a way that is congenial to others as well. Many a times, people live a life where they have thrown away everyone out of their life, live an isolated life, and expect all those care and affection to come back at the end of their life. Now, this is a challenge which we have come across in our clinic also. The caregivers would tell them, he never bothered anything about me the whole life. Now he's got memory problem. He is completely helpless. I am taking care of this person day in and out. How can I reconcile with this fact? Well, we don't have answers, absolute answers to it. Take away the extremes. In a general sense, I think the larger challenge, if you're a young person, if you're a middle-aged person, is to communicate to the elderly. They may not be able to give solutions to everything that is faced by the society or the current generation, but at least seeking their opinion, giving them adequate time, at least participating in a consultative process is all that might be required. People need to be communicated or passed on the information that they're still valued. And it comes, the onus is on the younger generation to do that. On the other hand, from the elderly perspective, where sometimes people, there is a misconception, what we see is very important to understand this as well. Many times elderly would communicate to the youngsters. We never spoke to our elderly like this. You are not even answering my questions properly, or you don't even care about me anymore. What has happened is most of the time the generation which are now in the elderly stage, I'm talking about 16 to 17 to 18 plus, have never had their parents living with them to that long. Now we are in a unique position whereby we call it second parenting. We have 90-year-old person mothering a 60-year-old man. An Indian concept, we still scold that person. There's adult to adult communication do not happen. The parents keep forgetting that they're talking to an adult who is now, or even an elderly man as a son. And that's what we find in family structures. I think we are all going through a transition phase. How we effectively communicate, incorporating that reality, is where the challenge will be addressed.
Okay, so thank you very much. So same Mr. Sabhabadi Narayanan asked one more question.
Okay.
You have mentioned about detox, right? Detox.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So he has a question to ask you whether it works at all, because Ayurveda seems to promote stating that all your body cells would get regenerated with the detox. Okay. So your perspectives on that, please.
It's a loaded question. I know I'm a modern medicine practitioner. So I take an agnostic view in this. What I mean by that is, I don't comment on things I don't know about. I understand a lot about how modern medicine understands about body and how it works. I read a little bit about Ayurveda. I'm not an expert. Ashtanga, there discussions are going on in one group. We tend to discuss with my friend who is an expert in that. But I'm not an expert in Ayurveda at all. So to talk about how Ayurvedic concepts talk about detoxification is alien to me. I will not be the person to comment on that. But on the other side, there is a vested interest in saying, or they're conceptualizing body as a pot full of toxins. That's not the way it is. The toxins are not like you have consumed 5 grams of arsenic and then you need to flush it out. It doesn't. It's not like that. It's a holistic well-being. If you look at the concept of Ayurveda, it's all about balance. And the same with homeopathy, where there is a homeostasis, which is what is talked about. I speak from my experience because my mother is an homeopath, and I follow homeopathy for all of my problem. I never had an antibiotic till 18 years of age, so I can safely tell you I have some experience with that. But the larger question here is to consider these are something which can be daily flushed out. You consume toxin one morning and then you flush out in the evening. It's a very simplistic way of understanding things. I would suggest the people to go through the Ashtanga Hridaya and then understand what exactly it's all about. It's all about balancing your humors, Vata, Pitta, Kapha, the all three type of personality. It's a highly individualistic form of medicine, which is what modern medicine is aspiring to be. Understanding the genome and understanding the larger societal structure. In psychiatry, we talked about biopsychosocial model whereby we integrate all these things. But these systems are highly evolved, and it's a partial understanding of it which makes people believe I could have a detox solution. And you buy 5,000 rupees detox bottle and then think everything is now regenerated. I think it's too naive and simplistic. I don't agree with that kind of a detox. No.
All right. So thank you for that clarification.
Yeah.
But yet another question is from one Arjuna Venkatesh.
Yeah.
The factors that accelerate aging, and do we have an option to control the circle of influence if that matters?
Well, again, we can look at it from multiple points of view. As a biologist, I would say I've already given that in my lecture. The only factor which known to have a reversal effect or prolong life and prolong prevent aging from happening is calorie restriction. Now, why that happens? Because body has an innate mechanism by which it's in a self-preservative mode. So when you're in a state of plenty and you keep putting in more and more, you're telling your body, the body is telling, I'm fed up, I don't want to. So it's enough. But that's one way of looking at it. But there are multiple factors. If you look at the factors which accelerate aging, well, obviously sedentary lifestyle. I don't want to list out all those things: cigarette smoking. We have stress. We have all kind of drug and substance abuse. Anything that you think about can have an impact on aging. And that stress is a broad concept which where you can incorporate your innate sense of well-being, sense of self, how you integrate well within yourself and the society. Any of those things can be addressed based on how we understood where the problem is. When it comes to aging, I think it is important to have that middle path where you accept there's an acceptance of a natural process of aging. Many times people struggle because of this fact that you cannot accept your aging. Two, that of identifying factors which makes you more unwell inside or physically. Addressing that would be one way of simple way of looking at it.
Okay. So that leads to another question, Dr.
Oh,
Jayakumar. That is,
okay.
how do we deal with the death anxiety then?
Death is another topic. Those who are interested, Isha Foundation, Sadhguru has written a book by itself, which is hot seller. I'm told around 2 lakh copies. The title is Death. Maybe you could, get that. But from the medical point of view, that's a $1 million question. So to a psychiatrist to ask that, we starting from Freudian period, we know there are two primordial drives. One is this thanatos, which is about the death drive. There's an instinctual drive inside. To that of understanding the self-limitation, the limitation of limited life that we have, the acceptance of mortality, a larger angle to it. I feel the fear of death, in one single sentence, if I can tell you, fear of death can only be overcome by acceptance of mortality. I feel there's no other way as a first step. Now, how do we accept mortality? You're welcome to come and discuss with me. I don't have answers to all, but if you could discuss. But that is something which everyone lives with. As Yudhishthira, again, I love that question. That's the most interesting question of all, which the Yaksha had asked. Why do people believe that they don't die and keep going, running around like this? So fear of death comes from our own fear of non-existence, a non-finite sense, losing. It could be at different angles. So it's important to understand what is it that you're frightened about. It may not be the same for everyone, by the way. Somebody who has lived for garnering wealth the whole life, the only worry of what would I do with all these things? Somebody who has had an existential crisis about why I was born. So it is different for different people. It's not as simple as one would think. Yeah.
So with that question, I'm moving on to another question.
Oh,
So what will be the
thank
role
you.
of AI in terms of aging?
That again, it's not my area of expertise. I would be humble enough to admit that that's something which I've not really thought about. But AI is invading all areas, uh, and big data and IoTs are the in thing nowadays. Now, what it could do? I'm being speculative here. I wish I had my cousin's husband, in fact, There's an entrepreneur who's a techie, and he actually asked me, "Why don't we develop a bot to your clinic? You know, bot can answer all the questions, and you can screen out and then use it." I said, "Boss, I have some difficulties there. Why should I be there then? What is my role?" You know, so we had that interesting discussion. I wish he was here to answer this. He would have given a much better answer. What I can see is, I feel we need more information on how and why aging happens. All right, the larger context in which it happens from various perspectives, various fields, from the sociological perspective, from the anthropological perspective, from the medical perspective. And it's not easy for one person, a normal human being, to accumulate this, because it is so vast, and we need to accept we are limited in our capability. And I think that is where AI will come. It will incorporate data. It will incorporate data and use it in such a way that we could never even imagine. And that's what I see going to happen in the next few years. But would that find the solution to death, where aging will be finally labeled as a disease and then completely be prevented, and then you decide when to die? And when would you want to die? You have created enough problem with all your life all these years. Why would you want to live forever? It's a question one everybody can ask. I've had enough. I've created enough problem. Why would I want to live for long? But I feel these are exciting times whereby the internet and the implications of it, artificial intelligence, is going to revolutionize the way we understand many of the core concepts where we could not even have answer about. And many a times, solutions or answers which have come from a very limited number of research people, you know, when you extrapolate to a billion people, it might throw out some surprising answers, and that is where the AI would lead to. That's the best guess I have. I hope somebody has a better answer. I would love to listen to.
Yeah, but in your area of expertise, there's another question from
Okay.
Stella Matthew from Golden Butterflies. If you could explain the difference between
Sorry. What is it? Golden butterflies.
butterflies. So this is an NGO which works for the children with palliative care needs.
Right. Thank you.
So,
Thanks for
yeah.
telling me that. Yeah. Okay.
So
Yeah.
she's asking. She's a person who I think takes care of elderly people as well. She cares for
Right.
them. So
Right.
she is asking the difference between dementia and Alzheimer's. So she says that she knows that there is no cure, but how does one deal with it as caregivers are also above 60?
Yeah. So dementia and Alzheimer's. No, I didn't get it.
Alzheimer's, and how does one deal with it as the caregiver is also above 60?
Yeah. You are welcome to join our group. We are a very small group of people who are actively interested in this area, where we are trying to find some solutions to huge, I would say, but I should have highlighted this as part of a talk, but because this was not directly related to a disease as such, I didn't want to do that. There's a huge, I would say, a pandemic facing us when it comes to cognitive disorders in the elderly. And as you know, age is the most important risk factors to develop Alzheimer's. So you age, you live longer, there's a much higher chance that you will have dementia due to Alzheimer's or any other form of dementia. Alzheimer's being the most common. In our population, vascular causes are also equally important. We need more services, in one sentence. And as I said, a person with dementia at the age of 80 is being provided care by a 60-year-old person. It is impossible to be a 24/7 nurse in an advanced stage of dementia. We need nursing home care for such people. Now, this might be one of the inhibitions of people talking towards actual needs of society. But I think it's high time that we did. I'll be happy if somebody in the group comes up and then forms a larger group to do some survey on what exactly happens in the community or society as to what the needs are, and will impress upon the government, because we as professionals we talk, they don't seem to listen, but the general public rising up and talking about this is what you're faced with, what are you trying to provide us with. We need more and more specialized care centers with advanced stage. In the early stage, I think having a index of suspicion at the earliest, when you have subtle memory problems, just to come and get screened. You are very happy to get a ECG done. You are very happy to have a master health checkup. Nobody above 50 who does some health checkup does a cognitive screening. Now we try to convince some of our hospitals to please include this, nothing else, just 10 minutes, 20 minutes, go do a cognitive screening. You might be able to identify a reversible cause of dementia. Still in our, it's I like a deaf air, here that you're talking about. We need more awareness, more specialized support services, increased training. We have geriatric care trainers, specialist nursing group coming up in the institutions. We need ground level people who can provide support services to elderly who provide care. That is the need of the hour. And there are centers in Chennai itself who are doing that, started doing that. There's a larger initiative which is now being taken up by Institute of Mental Health under Dr. Purna Chandrika. Really happy to be part of some of the effort that she has in. She has a vision to understand this and then work on that. I think that's the need of the hour. Sorry, you're not audible, Tad.
One more question. One more question.
Okay.
Yeah,
Right.
there is a mushrooming of old age homes in India. Yeah. So how do you? What are your perspectives related to that? So this is asked by yet another participant. So,
yeah. Right. So look, I think what the problem with our society is, if you look at some of the advanced societies where so-called better aged care services are available. I say so-called because Australia is considered to have some of the best aged care services in the world. Guess what happened 2 years ago? There's a hospital where elderly dementia patients were admitted. They found that these people were severely abused, physically abused, and the care given was appalling. The video surfaced on social media of how the nurses treated them. That led to a national outrage, so much so that they created a royal commission. They call everything royal because of their connection to the English monarchy. The Royal Commission to look on aged care services, and they're completely overhauling that. But a system where, like in NHS in UK or in Australia, what happens there is there's a systematized way of systemic way, the system which takes care of the aged. So we have aged care assessment teams which look at the needs of the elderly. Now that has happened because these societies are individualistic societies for quite some time after the industrialization. Many of them did not have support like what we have over here. Now, the reason why we have more over here is because people are living longer and life expectancy is increasing. We are reaching what those countries have reached, say, 30 years ago. Second important thing is as people get older, the various requirements change. So there needs to be a very proper way of assessing what each and every individual person's requirement is and what level of care that they require. The concept of old age homes in those countries, that has changed to more and more of home-based care. Now it's come a full circle. Now the home-based care in our country is entirely by own family members, but over there is about empowering the elderly to live as much as possible an independent living with additional support from the community. That's the concept which is there. So if you ask me, old age homes are increasing in India. I would say we're just at the one part of the cycle. It will go further, and we are more in an affluent society. Will become a more affluent society. People are able to afford their own care when this universal healthcare system comes. I'm going to see more and more of people living in their own homes with support, living as much as possible independently, but also a significant section who would require institutional care, nursing care, and that needs to be provided by specialized care. Now, old age home doesn't necessarily mean nursing care homes. Nursing care is specialized care centers. People do not even differentiate that. We don't understand the difference. Old age homes where we actually live with fully functional status. Now, that might be a larger impact of the larger social changes, which was highlighted by Diwakar in the beginning itself. And we are left with no choice. We have people from overseas sending as much money as possible, just give them a nice, secure place. And they're willing to provide that money. What about people who do not have that money? Well, we need to highlight the larger problem to the government. We need to show the statistics. We need to show that there are larger people who are homeless. We NGOs which work with elderly uh, day in and day out see the pathetic situation and the tragic stories in and around. So I would say old age homes are going to be a necessity, but it has to be structured. It has to be monitored sufficiently, and there has to be a system which ensures safety and well-being of the elderly, which is much better than abuse at home or thrown out at the street. So one cannot have a rigid view over here. That would be my answer.
Thank you so much for comprehensively putting it across the perspectives. So one last question, and
Okay.
with that we will conclude, and we'll go into the wind up the session with that query,
Sure.
with the Thanksgiving vote of thanks. So before
Yeah.
that, what are the two things that we could practice on a daily basis when we talk about aging and living with the aged?
Okay. When it comes to aging, I would say go out, get exercise, and control your diet. As simple as that. Nothing more is required. If you're already not diabetic, not hypertensive by your 40, there's a very high chance that you can have a healthy lifestyle if you maintain your physical well-being and fitness. Focus on that. There's no excuse for that. Or else you be prepared for some of the disabilities with aging, at a much earlier age. I'm not going to tell you that's going to prevent death. No. Now, living with the aged, certainly it's a larger question which every youngster has to ask. Every child, not a child anymore, anyone in their middle ages should ask about how. I would say effective planning is the most important step. As a middle-aged man or as a person who is retired, post-retirement, this is what one needs to do. Think of a planned environment because you're going to live longer, and your cost of living is going to increase. There's going to be more and more requirements where you may have less and less resources. All your well-being depends on how you plan effectively some of those aspects. At least have some broad idea and not leave it to, okay, let these things happen, then I go to deal with that. You may not be in a position to do that. I think that kind of summarizes what needs to be done, and it's applicable to both the person who are living with the aged and the aged themselves.
Okay. Thank you so much for that. I think it has summed up wonderfully for all of us to take home at least 2, 3 messages home and start practicing in the process. And this is now time for deliver the word of thanks. So I request Ms. Aspi Joyson to deliver the word of thanks and close the session. And thank you so much, Dr. J. Kumar Menon. Thank you. So I request Aspi Joyson. Thank you.
Good evening to all. Now this is the time for expressing a sincere gratitude to all those who have been part in this endeavor. First of all, I express my gratitude to Dr. J. Kumar Menon for the wonderful interactive session on aging and living with the aged. I'm sure that we all have got an in-depth understanding of the topic. We look forward to having more sessions with you, Doctor. Thank you. This webinar has been possible with the continuous support of the team members of Wellbe Work and the International Institute of Psychotherapy. I express my sincere gratitude to the Wellbe Work and IIP team members for putting all together to run this webinar series, and special thanks to Ms. Rachel Victor who introduced Dr. J. Kumar Menon. I take this opportunity to thank Padma Vibhushan Professor Dr. M. Sharada Menon for her constant and inspiring guidance and support. I especially thank all the participants who registered and have attended the sessions, and we hope you continue to participate in the future sessions too. I'm sorry if I missed thanking anyone. Thank you.